Codington County, South Dakota, September 1882. While every settler on the high plains was frantically stacking dried sod and stuffing wool into the cracks of their shanties, Elias Korhonen was building something that stopped travelers dead on the trail to Watertown. The 38-year-old Finnish immigrant was constructing a 16-foot glass and timber spire in the middle of his homestead, connected his sod house by a network of buried tunnels and tin pipes. The sun has finally baked his mind, one rancher muttered to another as they passed. Glass won't last 5 minutes in a Dakota hailstorm, and that chimney won't heat a pot of coffee. Nobody understood what Elias knew about air that refuses to sit still. And if you want to find out what happened when the January freeze hit minus 34 degrees, and Elias hadn't touched his coal pile in 4 days, listen closely. Elias Korhonen had arrived in the Dakota Territory in the spring of 1879, part of a wave of Scandinavian immigrants seeking independence in a country that promised acres for the taking. He had left behind the Pirkanmaa region of southern Finland, where his family had worked as master furnace tenders in the iron and glass foundries of Tampere for generations. These were craftsmen who understood how heat and light moved through transparent mediums the way ranchers understood livestock. In Finland, Elias had spent 20 years near the blast furnaces, learning to manipulate temperatures that could turn rock into liquid. But more than shaping metal, he had learned to observe. He had watched how sunlight streaming through the foundry skylights could raise the temperature of the drafting rooms by 25 degrees without a single coal burning. The industrial works were a laboratory of thermodynamics, and Elias had been a meticulous student. America promised land for those strong enough to hold it. What it delivered on the sweeping South Dakota plains was wind, endless grass, and winters that made Scandinavian nights seem mild. His first winter in Codington County nearly ended his life. The temperature plummeted to minus 25 degrees, and the wind discovered every fissure in the claim shack he was renting. Elias had no experience with the specific breed of cold, the kind that froze coffee in the pot while it sat on the stove, that killed oxen where they stood, that turned a man's breath to ice crystals before it cleared his beard. He watched his neighbors burn through entire stacks of precious timber and expensive coal, chopping and hauling from dawn to dusk just to keep from freezing in their sleep. The problem, Elias realized, wasn't the severity of the cold. The problem was the strategy used to fight it. Every settler on the plains approached winter with the same blunt tactic. Burn fuel, generate heat, lose that heat through thin walls, burn more fuel. It was a war of attrition that humanity was destined to lose. The coal was infinite. Fuel was not. Men exhausted themselves gathering combustible material, while their families shivered in cabins that bled warmth into the uncaring sky. But Elias had seen a different method. In the Tampere works, nobody heated the storage annexes with fire. They let the sun do the heavy lifting. Angled glass captured the light. Dark slagstone absorbed it, and the natural tendency of hot air to rise created a circulation loop that moved warmth exactly where it was required. The Finns had been engineering with thermal mass for centuries. South Dakota had brutal winters, certainly, but it also possessed a resource that Finland often lacked: relentless, piercing sunshine. Even in the depths of January, the sun blazed across the snow-covered plains with an intensity that forced Elias to shade his eyes. All that solar radiation pouring down day after day, and every settler ignored it completely. They huddled around their cast-iron stoves burning buffalo chips, while free heat streamed past their windows, uncollected. By 1882, Elias had saved enough to purchase 40 acres of flat steppe north of Watertown. The property had nothing to recommend it. No creek, no grove of cottonwoods, no hills for shelter. Other immigrants had bypassed it as barren. But Elias hadn't bought it for what it possessed. He bought it for what it received. Unobstructed sunlight from the moment of sunrise to the final seconds of dusk, with the low winter sun angles striking the south side directly. His nearest neighbor, a Scots-Irish cattleman named Thomas McGowan, had watched Elias survey the empty plot and spat on the ground. Nothing there but wind and grasshoppers. McGowan had told him, "You'll freeze or starve, likely both." "There is sunlight," Elias had replied calmly. "Sunlight won't heat a soddy," McGowan scoffed. Elias offered a faint smile. "It will, if you know how to trap it." The argument with his wife, Ano, began the moment Elias unrolled his schematics. He had sketched the design by the light of a kerosene lamp over several months. A 16-foot tower built of glass and reinforced timber, painted pitch black on all interior surfaces, connected to their future home by an underground trench at the base and a duct to the wall near the eaves. Ano stared at the drawings as if he had proposed building a sailing ship on the prairie. "A glass tower," she said, her voice devoid of hope. "In the Dakotas, where hail falls like musket balls. The glass will be tempered, angled, and positioned away from prevailing storm winds." Elias insisted. "And what is this spire supposed to do besides shatter in the first blizzard and make us the laughingstock of the territory?" Elias tried to explain. The sun would heat the black interior of the tower to over 100 degrees, even in the teeth of winter. Hot air rises. Everyone knew that. As the heated air climbed and poured into the cabin through the upper pipe, it would pull cooler air from the cabin floor through the underground tunnel and into the base of the tower to be heated again. "A continuous loop," he said, gesture with his charcoal pencil. "A thermal engine powered by nothing but the sky. We will have warm air flowing into the house all day. No coal, no wood, just the sun. And at night we burn fuel, but only at night. We will use half the supplies of the others." Ano pushed the drawings away. "In Tampere, your family made useful things from fire. This is neither beautiful nor useful. This is vanity." Word of Elias's plan reached Thomas McGowan within the week. The cattleman rode over on the pretext of offering advice and found Elias staking out the tower's footprint 30 feet from where the house would stand. "Korhonen." McGowan called out, leaning from his saddle. "The boys in town are talking about your crystal palace." "It is not a palace. It is a solar chimney," Elias corrected, driving a stake into the hard earth. "They're calling a finished sound a tower." McGowan chuckled, saying, "You plan to steam yourself like a vegetable." Elias continued his work. "The air moves through. It does not stay to cook anything." McGowan walked his horse closer, studying the dimensions with genuine concern. "I've been running herds on this grass for 10 years. I've seen hail that punches through cedar shingles. Glass out here is a death wish. This glass will be double strength, imported from Chicago and protected by overhangs," Elias said without looking up. "And when it breaks, when you spent your seed money on a pile of sharp dust, then I will rebuild it." McGowan shook his head. "Your wife is a saint to put up with this." "My wife thinks I have lost my senses." "She's not wrong," the Scotsman said, turning his horse. "I've seen dreamers come out here before. Most leave after the first winter, if the ground isn't too frozen to dig their graves. The plains don't forgive experiments, Korhonen." That Sunday at the Lutheran service in town, Reverend Blackwood pulled Elias aside. The minister had heard the rumors, the concern that the immigrant family was squandering their resources on a glass folly that would result in tragedy. "The solar tower," Reverend Blackwood said gently. "Some of the elders are worried about Ano and the children. They should worry about their own coal cellars," Elias replied. "I've seen 3 families already with supplies too meager for a long freeze." "Perhaps," the Reverend allowed, "but glass and sunlight won't keep your children warm when January comes howling." "The Greeks understood these principles 2,000 years ago," Elias countered. "The physics have not changed since then." Reverend Blackwood studied him. "I will pray the physics remember themselves when the blizzard strikes." "Prayer and engineering," Elias nodded. "One without the other is rarely sufficient." What Elias Korhonen understood from his years in the industrial foundries, modern engineers would later quantify with precision, but the principles he was applying had been used since antiquity. Civilizations that heated structures with sunlight centuries before the mathematics were formalized. The key was the greenhouse effect. Sunlight passes through glass effortlessly, its short wavelengths slipping between molecules. But when that light strikes a dark surface and converts to heat, the energy radiates as longer infrared wavelengths. These longer waves cannot pass back through the glass. The heat becomes trapped. Elias's tower would exploit this ruthlessly. 16 feet tall, 4 feet square, with glass panels on the south, east, and west faces angled to catch the low winter arc of the sun. Every interior surface was painted black, the darkest pigment he could mix from lampblack and oil to absorb maximum light and convert it to thermal energy. The numbers were absolute. On a clear winter day in South Dakota, roughly 250 to 300 BTUs of solar energy strike each square foot of south-facing surface per hour. Elias's tower presented roughly 60 square feet of glass to the winter sun. That meant 15,000 to 18,000 BTUs of potential energy entering the structure every hour of direct sunlight. Black surfaces absorb over 95% of incoming light. The interior of the tower, walls, floor, and rear panel, would convert nearly all that captured radiance into heat. On a sunny winter day, even when outside temperatures hovered at zero, the tower's interior would reach 100 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. But capturing heat was only half the equation. Moving it was a challenge. Hot air rises. As air warms, its molecules spread apart, making it less dense than the cooler air surrounding it. Buoyancy takes over, and the warm air surges upward. Elias designed his tower to weaponize this principle. As the black surfaces heated the enclosed column of air, it would rise rapidly toward the peak. A 6-inch tin pipe connected the tower's apex to the cabin's upper wall, allowing hot air poured directly into the living space. But rising air creates a vacuum. Something must replace it. This was where the underground trench came in. Elias dug a tunnel 3 feet deep and 40 feet long, connecting the cabin's floor level to the base of the tower. As hot air rushed out the top of the tower into the cabin, it pulled cooler air from the cabin floor through the underground passage and into the tower's base to be heated in turn. The earth surrounding the tunnel maintained a constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit, pre-tempering the incoming air, so the tower didn't have to work as hard. The result was a continuous convection loop, a thermal engine with no moving parts, powered entirely by the temperature differential between a sun-heated tower and the cooler cabin interior. As long as the sun shone and the tower stayed warmer than the house, air would circulate automatically. No bellows, no fans, no coal. Elias calculated the flow rate based on his observations in the Tampere drying rooms. A well-designed system could move 200 to 400 cubic feet of air per minute. If that air entered the cabin at 90 degrees and exited at 65 degrees, the system would deliver approximately 6,000 to 10,000 BTUs per hour, equivalent to a small potbelly stove running continuously. His neighbor saw glass as fragile and sunlight as a weak winter amenity. Elias saw a free and endless fuel source pouring from the sky, waiting for someone clever enough to catch it. The sun didn't care that it was January. It burned the same as always. He just had to build a trap. Construction began in May of 1882, as soon as the frost unlocked the soil. Elias had ordered the glass months earlier. Thick panes shipped by rail from a manufacturer in Chicago, each one packed in sawdust and crated in pine. The shipment cost more than most settlers spent on their livestock. Eno had watched the crates arrive with an expression that mixed dread with resignation. The underground tunnel came first. Elias dug alone for 3 weeks, carving a passage through the dense prairie sod. He reinforced the tunnel walls with scrap cedar, creating a lung that would breathe for the house. The earth surrounding the passage would maintain its constant temperature, protecting the air flow from the surface freeze. The tower foundation went in during June. Elias laid a limestone base, sunk deep for stability. The corner posts rose from this footing. 4 heavy fir beams, each one charred with fire to resist rot and darken the wood. The frame took shape through July. He built it like a grain silo, but with the south face angled back 15 degrees from vertical to intercept the winter sun. Cross-bracing ensured the structure could withstand the gale-force winds that swept down from Canada. The glass insulation required the precision of a jeweler. Elias had designed removable wooden shutters that could be winched up to protect the panes during severe weather. The panes themselves sat in frame sealed with a mixture of linseed oil and clay, flexible enough to absorb the vibration of the wind without cracking. The interior painting took 2 full days. Elias mixed it with oil until he had a paste darker than a moonless night, then applied it to every interior surface. When finished, the tower's interior looked like a void. The cabin rose in August, positioned precisely to align with the tunnel and the upper duct. Elias hired 2 Norwegian brothers for the framing, men who asked few questions and appreciated the hard currency. The structure was modest, but built with unusual attention to ceiling. On September 21st, 1882. Elias sealed the final glass panel into place and opened the dampers for the first time. The autumn sun, still strong, streamed through the glass and struck the black walls. Within 30 minutes, the tower's interior reached 94 degrees. Elias placed his hand over the duct where it entered the cabin. Warm air poured through, steady as a river. He walked to the floor grate and felt the cool air being pulled downward into the tunnel. The engine was running. Now, he just had to see if it would survive the winter. By late October, Elias Korhonen's glass tower had become the most discussed landmark in the county. Drovers moving cattle to the railhead would slow their horses to stare at the black monolith glinting in the sun. He's built a lighthouse for landlocked ships. One cowboy joked in the Watertown saloon. 50 miles from water deep enough to float a canoe. Another suggested it was a religious altar, probably worships the sun like a pagan. Whatever it was, the consensus was clear. It wouldn't survive December. Thomas McGowan rode over in early November to inspect the finished work. It's still standing, the Scotsman admitted. I'll grant you that. It will stand for 20 years, Elias said. McGowan peered into glass, looking at the abyss of black paint inside. It's like looking into a coal chute. Why paint it all black? Black absorbs. White reflects. I want every crumb of heat the sun offers. And these pipes, McGowan pointed, you expect hot air to flow through them by magic? By physics, Elias corrected. Hot air has no politics. It rises because it must. McGowan stepped back, tipping his hat. I've seen men try clever things on this grass. Windmills that flew away like kites. Ditches that flowed backward. I hope your children are hardy, Korhonen. They'll need to be. Aino face her own trials. At the general store, the other wives whispered. Mrs. Hanson, the baker's wife, pulled Aino aside. My husband says the men are taking bets on when the glass will burst, she said quietly. Let them bet, Aino said, though her stomach nodded. Elias knows fire and heat. He understands these things. The first hard freeze arrived on November 10th. Elias woke before dawn, terrified he would find shattered glass. Instead, he found the tower frosted but intact. As the sun crested the horizon, he watched the interior temperature gauge climb. 50 degrees, then 70 degrees, then 85 degrees by mid-morning. He placed his hand over the cabin vent and felt the warmth flowing, pushed by nothing but nature's law. The cabin, which had dropped to 40 degrees overnight, climbed to 62 degrees by noon without a single stick of wood in the stove. Aino stood at the floor grate, feeling the draft. It is working, she whispered. It is just the way of things, Elias replied. The sun shines, the air warms, the air moves. January 1883 arrived with a ferocity that old settlers would talk about for decades. A polar vortex descended on the territory on January 12th, driving temperatures from a manageable 20 degrees to minus 15 degrees by sundown. By dawn on the 13th, the thermometer read minus 32 degrees. By the following night, it touched minus 38 degrees, cold enough to snap iron. But the wind was the true killer, screaming across the drift at 40 miles an hour, driving the wind chill into numbers that meant death for the unprepared. Across Codington County, the battle for survival began. Thomas McGowan burned through a month's worth of coal in 3 days. His house, sturdy by local standards, leaked heat like a sieve. Ice formed on the inside of his windows, an inch thick. His family slept in a communal pile under buffalo robes, taking turns feeding the stove that devoured their winter stores. Reverend Blackwood's parsonage ran low on fuel by the 3rd day. He ended up burning his bookshelves to keep the study warm enough for the elderly. At the Korhonen homestead, the morning of January 13th began in silence. Elias checked the readings. The cabin was 42 degrees, chilly but safe. He waited for the sun. By 9 a.m., despite the outside air being minus 35 degrees, the sun struck the tower's glass. Elias watched as the black interior began its work. By 10:30, warm air was pouring through the duct at 90 degrees. The cabin temperature rose to 58 degrees. By noon, with the sun blazing in a cloudless frozen sky, the tower interior reached 115 degrees. The convection engine roared silently, delivering a stream of heat that pushed the cabin to 65 degrees. Shirt sleeve weather inside, while the apocalypse raged outside. Elias hadn't touched his coal bin in 4 days. The sunny, brutal cold held for 3 days, giving the solar tower optimal conditions. Only when the clouds rolled in on the 4th day did Elias finally light his stove, using a fraction of the fuel his neighbors were consuming. The cold snap broke on January 18th. 6 days of killing frost. Thomas McGowan rode over on the 20th, his face peeling from frostbite, looking haggard. He found Elias splitting wood in the yard, a pile that looked untouched. "How?" McGowan rasped. "How are you standing here with wood to spare?" Elias pointed at the glass tower. "The sun never stopped shining. I just built a bucket to catch it." McGowan stood inside the Korhonen cabin, stunned by the lingering warmth. "Show me," he said. "Show me everything." Elias retrieved his ledger. He had recorded every degree. January 13th. Outside, -35. Tower at noon, 115. Cabin, 65. Fuel burned, none. McGowan flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. "You burned no fuel during the worst freeze in 10 years? For 3 days, no. I lit the stove when the clouds came." McGowan placed his hand over the duct. Even with the weak afternoon sun, warm air ghosted against his palm. "The tower is at 80 degrees now," Elias said. "Outside is 10. The air must rise." They walked outside. McGowan circled the tower, touching the glass, looking at the tunnel entrance. "The earth warms the air before it even enters the glass?" "Yes. The ground is a battery that holds the summer heat." "I called you a madman," McGowan said quietly. "I told the town you would freeze." "You did not understand the machine," Elias said. "I came from a place where we use the sun to smelt and dry. The idea is old. Can it be built by a man who is not a furnace master?" McGowan asked. "The glass is simple. The digging is hard, but the design that I can teach." McGowan extended a gloved hand. "Then teach me. I have sons who are tired of shivering." "Bring your notebook," Elias said, shaking the hand. "We start when the ground thaws." The first visitor after McGowan was Reverend Blackwood, who arrived with humility and a request for a diagram. By the end of February, Elias had hosted a dozen families. They pressed their hands to the warm pipe and looked at the black tower with the reverence usually saved for miracles. The men who built them gathered monthly at Elias's cabin, calling themselves the Dakota Solar Society. Ano watched her husband become the quiet leader of a revolution. "You proved them wrong," she told him. "The sun proved them wrong." Elias corrected. "I just opened the door." Elias Korhonen lived another 40 years on that homestead. He died in 1922, surrounded by grandchildren who had grown up in a home warmed by light. The original tower stood until the Dust Bowl years, when it was finally replaced by a modernized version built by his grandson. The winter of 1883 remained the benchmark for cold, but for the families of Codenton County who followed Elias's design, it was remembered as the winter the sun kept them warm. By 1890, solar chimneys dotted the plains of the Dakotas and Minnesota. Agricultural journals published papers on the Korhonen method, the principle Elias understood, using transparent surfaces to trap energy and natural convection to distribute it, is the grandfather of modern passive solar design. Trom walls and solar sunspaces today use the exact physics that heated a sod house in South Dakota. Elias's neighbors fought winter with axes and exhaustion. Elias cooperated with nature and let the physics carry the load. He saw winter not as an enemy, but as a season with clear skies and strong temperature differentials, conditions that, if understood, could be turned into survival.